Hey, Marco, welcome today.
Hello, good morning, right? Or
Yeah,
afternoon.
good morning for local time for me. Just
Yeah.
after 9 o'clock here, and it's about what five o'clock your time?
Yes, it's actually 6 p.m. in Central
Okay.
Europe. I'm in Italy, but almost all of the Europe has the same time zone besides UK and Portugal, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I really appreciate you coming on today. I'm very happy that I get a chance to host you and also talk about some of the really interesting things that I mentioned on, I think some really cool and very useful practices on DAX. For the people attending, I want to
Yep.
thank everyone for coming in. We have 61 people right now already tuning in, and that number
Very
usually keeps
good.
climbing up. So quite a few people hanging out. Looks like some people from India and everything. So everyone, thanks for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. Like I've said with my other calls, is I'm really happy to kind of be providing a lot of other industry expertise onto this channel this year. And Marco certainly is, when it comes to DAX, him and Alberto are there really isn't anybody else. Like MVPs like us go to them when we have questions that stump us with related to DAX. So again, yeah, thank you so much for coming in. And yeah, like if
It's
you
my
want to,
pleasure.
yeah, thank you so much. And if you could, for the people, for the small percentage of people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick introduction?
Okay, so my name is Marco Russo. I work in SQL BI, mainly with Alberto Ferrari. We have a small team that support us in the content we produce. We mainly produce content for data modeling and DAX for, of course, Power BI and analysis services. Also Power Pivot in Excel, but a small percentage today of people use that tool.
Yeah.
We produce a lot of content in the last 10 years, since the first version of Power Pivot for Excel, which started to introduce the same technology we have today in Power BI, and before that we were working already in business intelligence, but in the last 5, 6 years we mainly focused on the engine, the DAX language, the engine, so performance, data modeling, all the topics that regard the semantic modeling of what you build with Power BI or analysis services is what we do for training, support, books, videos, and many other stuff.
Yeah, it's like is it like five, six plus books you've written now between the two of you, I think at least?
No more. I mean, it depends because I started writing books uh, about programming. I mean, I'm a developer. Originally, I'm a developer. Moved to business intelligence,
Yep.
moved to data analysis, but I still write some code today. For example, DAX Studio, 95% of the code is written by Darren Gospel, but
Yeah.
I wrote a small part of DAX Studio too. And so when I have time, it's like my hobby now to write code because what I do, my job is no longer writing code, but I like it. So when I can, I still try to write some part of the code. Yes, and I wrote a few books about Link, about .NET and other stuff in the past. So yeah,
Yeah,
I lost the count. Basically, if you go to secretbi.com, we have a list of books. I can go
yep.
there, but
No, yeah, and I mean it's writing books as long as you've had an MVP, which is back from early 2000s at this point. I know that Twitter conversation that we had with Darren and a few others, like Alberto had the stack of chips that was in basically a
yeah,
randomized order, but
yeah.
it's like for some of you
I
guys, you
also
have no
have my
room.
my one there. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
There's
it's
one there too, but yeah.
and you're almost out of room. There's like not much left at the top for any remaining
But
chips.
I broke a few years. One day it broke. I mean, it fell from the place where it is now. It was a strange day. So and the two or three of them were broken. So, but you know, it doesn't matter. So
Exactly.
it's just yeah. I have more space this way. So
Totally fair. Just a quick mention for people in the audience. Marco
yep.
did mention DAX Studio. If you're interested in some of the stuff that Darren's done, he was on last week. So just if you go down to the
Yeah,
channel
yeah.
in the description, check out his stuff. He walked through some really useful ways of kind of like how do I go through troubleshooting and optimizing DAX and understanding all of the parts of the query. So another very useful video
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
that. But for today, the thing that I'm excited to talk to Marco about, and the entire conversation, Marco started around a blog that you wrote. Yeah, was it? I'm looking at the date. I think it was June 2019. So almost like a year and a half ago, but it was a feature that came out that finally let you filter at the visual level for slicers, because that was something that people had been asking
Yes.
for years, and it was very frustrating that you couldn't do that. So people very commonly would use bidirectional filtering, which is kind of what like Power Pivot used to do back in the day with allowing
Yeah.
the cross filtering between slicers, but it has a huge performance cost and it can be very dangerous because it can create ambiguous directions for flows of the filtering. And it's probably one of the most common things that I see in models is probably one or two things. I very often see a lot of naked divides, and that's a quick fix with meaning they don't use the divide function, they just divide by two. Very common like thing that I see in there. The other really common one is I see people having bidirectional filtering turn on. Like, why do you do that? Oh, it's because I want my calendar table to filter my product table. If I filter to this month, I only want to see corresponding products. And it's like I immediately probably at least once a month direct somebody to that article, like read this on why it's dangerous and why you should apply visual level filtering. So I thought it was a great opportunity to talk about that, and then also just broader DAX best practices as well.
Yeah. So, okay, we can start from here. I'm just trying to get a diagram so we can start talking about that. Maybe you can go to the screen one moment. So,
Absolutely.
the idea, now, the model doesn't matter now. I just want to focus on the diagram here, which is the following. So, what is a bidirectional filter, first of all? In a relationship, the relationship is a way to propagate a filter between two tables in Power BI and in Tabular in general. So when you double click this, what you have here is this feature, cross filter direction, which by default should be single. And should be single in any relationship besides particular cases. But let's talk about simple models like this one. So here I have, if I go here in the diagram view, so let me show, oh, now I have this stupid, let's go here and let's replace this with a better font, because usually what we do, so first of all we need a real report with something visible. Then I can put something like the customer, country, in the rows here, just to make an example. Let's transform this way, and I don't like the quantity here, I want the country here. Now, here we go. So, the classical problem, and the reason why many people use the bidirectional filter is the following. Now I have a simple visualization. I prefer to use the numbers, but clearly I could use a chart here. And then I start applying a slicer, and the first obvious slicer is about the time. Let's do something very simple, like for example, let's include the date. The date creates this range, so I can change the range here, and you see that the numbers immediately change. Mm-hmm. And I'm working with 12 million rows, by the way, at the moment, so the engine is very fast when I do this. Now, what happens when I include the product, for example? So if I go here and I include just the product name here, of course I have a long list of products here. And what happens at this point is that even though I have restricted my sales to just a few days, you see that the number now is smaller, I continue to see all the products in the slicer. And if I click on one product in a random way, you see nothing. So what's the point of looking at a list of products when only a few of those products have a value to display?
Yep.
So let me just increase the font so we can better read this. So let's use here 20. So the idea is that if I continue 1, 2, 3, 4, sooner or later I will find some product. But which product has data, right?
Yeah.
So one easy way to fix this could be this one. If I go here and I enable the bidirectional filter between product and sales, what happens? Remember, the relationship in Power BI is just a way to propagate a filter. Mm-hmm. And when I propagate the filter in a bidirectional way, it means that if something filters sales, the filter continued to propagate to product. Now, if you remember what I created in my model, I created a slicer for the date, which is here. So the date is filtering the sales, and the customer country, which is a field here, is filtering the sales too. Because I'm displaying sales amount, which is a measure that aggregates a column from sales, I want to see the sales for that particular for that particular period in that particular country. In each cell I have a country. Yep. By default, this does not propagate to product. So because the slicer is another visual, because if it was the same visual, it would have been filtered automatically. But because it is a different visual, it is a different query, it doesn't know anything about what is going on in the other visual, and it just shows the products. However, if I filter something on date, I want to filter the product based on the presence of one or more transactions in sales, I will only make visible those products that have sales in the selected date and customer country. Now, because the country is a list of all the countries, what I actually obtain in my report, I'm not filtering by country for this slicer, I'm only filtering by date. Now, because I included the bidirectional filter, and now this is funny because it's not working, let me try this again. So, oh yes, because I had, sorry, the reason is that I had, let me explain what happened. I forgot that before moving to the diagram view, I had a few items selected that now we no longer see.
Gotcha.
We no longer see those items because they are still selected there, but they are no longer visible. If I clear here, if I clear the selection that is still there but not visible, all of a sudden I see the numbers here, and the products I see here are only products that have some data. Yep. So for example, if I click here, I see data. If I click here, I see data. I no longer see rows that are that don't have any data. And it seems a great idea. Unfortunately, this is the wrong solution to a good problem, because the problem I created now is that I'm also filtering subcategory, I'm also filtering category, yep. And if I had other tables completely unrelated to my analysis, I would filter them too, breaking some other measure, possibly in my report, which was not intended to be filtered this way.
Yep.
So even though this doesn't happen, and you say, Marco, my numbers are good, however, you're still paying a big performance penalty on all those other measures that you have in your model that may not have the need of this propagation. So let's try to fix the model first, and then let's discuss about what other consequences, longer term, you could have by this small decision, because this is very bad. I mean, you say, well, this is not, my report is not affected today, but you are making a huge bet for your future. Now, I can tell you, I'm a gambler a little bit when I go to the casino.
Sure.
But for my report, I don't like to gamble on my report. That's what I think. So what I prefer to do is, first, how can I obtain the same result without making, creating a technical debt for my future versions of this report? Where I can use here, in the filters, I can say, okay, this visual, this slicer should have a filter by, for example, sales amount. And I want to filter those products that have sales amount that is not blank, just this. It's not blank, is a quick filter. It's better than greater than 0. And if I say that, now, even though I go back here and I restore the original default single direction, now what happens is that just for this slicer, I have the same behavior. I no longer have the bidirectional filter, but the slicer still behave like I want. I don't see products that don't have any sales amount. So the list of the products is already filtered. And if I expand or change the selection of dates, this list is updated too. You see that this changed now because I changed the filter over date. Yes, I have to do this in every single slicer where I want this behavior, but the advantage, I'm in full control. For example, what should be the logic for displaying the products? Maybe the sales amount, maybe the quantity, maybe something else, maybe a stranger condition that I will not be able to obtain just by using the relationship. Rule of thumb, show me all the products that have sales plus all the products of this category, which is very important. I don't want to, hide those reports. If I have no sales for that report, I want to be able to see that. I can. Now I can, right? Now, so this is the right solution. Unfortunately, when Microsoft released this feature, the feature is the ability to create a filter over a measure for a visual. And this works also for the slicers. Unfortunately, this filter pane is also the problem now, because what I can do for a slicer in the report cannot be obtained if I include here products. If I go here in the filters on this page and I include, where is, oh, I have to remove this. I want to include the same product name, right? I go here and I put product name filters on this page. Look at what happens now. If I restrict this, the list you see here has all the products, also those products that should not be made visible. And because here, this list, the list that I can see in the filters pane, cannot be controlled by a condition we write. Of course, I already asked to Microsoft, please give me an option to add another filter here. So, unfortunately, if I restore the bidirectional filter here, the bidirectional filter here works with the filter pane. And I say unfortunately because this could be the reason why you say, oh Marco, I want to put my, let me think, no, it's not working now. Funny, did they change something? This is very interesting. Let me change something, maybe this is just a cache. So, wow, which is good.
They did an update in the system?
They changed this behavior. When did they update this? This is a good thing, by the way.
They did. I remember they released a second version of December, like a few weeks back, where they had some kind of just small changes.
I don't think this is interesting. I mean, I was used to see this list to be filtered through the bidirectional filter, the same way we have seen the slicer, and this was a problem, but if they fixed it, I'm just happy, so that's fine. That's good. Oh, wait a minute, no, right, because the problem is that I have to filter, I have to apply the filter on this page here, maybe this is what I have to do. So let me try to put the filter for a single date, just to see, because maybe this only reacts to filter that we include here. Come on, I want to see the filter here, I cannot. Filter on page, oh here we go, I didn't see, okay. So now if I filter, for example, this is a date where I certainly don't have any product, because I don't have sales in 2005, and you see that the product name now is blank. So, okay, you see that it works. So, a filter in the page filter will produce side effect on other filters in the page filter based on the relationship. This is exactly the example I wanted to show. And we don't have control over that. So, this could be an important consideration for the way you design the report. You might think that using the filter pane rather than a slicer in the report is just a question of, you know, how you organize the filters graphically. But actually there are a few differences in features that you want to be aware of. So if you want to get the feature of excluding the data in the filter based on the selection in other filters, better to use the filters in the report because you can rely on the external measure. You can do that with the bidirectional filter, but the cost is 1. Performance. 2. Wrong numbers if you create a complex model, for reasons that now it would be too long to explain. 3rd,
Agreed.
what if I add another table? I mean, if I create another table here, the problem I have, and I can show this immediately. So imagine that we have here store bidirectional filter 2. So I have 2, because I need to do this for 2 different entities, store and product, because I want to see only the store where I sold something, only the products that I sold to some customer, for example, right?
Yep.
At this point, the day I want to add another table, like for example purchases, between store and product, I'm in trouble. Let me show you. Let's say that I want to create a calculate table. I want just to simulate the purchase table, okay? Let's invent a purchase table. Purchase is equal to the first 10 rows of the sales table based on nothing, okay? Here we go. Imagine for a moment that these are purchases, okay? We don't want to see the data. I want just to see the data model. Now I go here and I connect the store key, which should be somewhere here, with the store key. So here, store key, store key. Come on. It's validating the data. Remember, we have, you know, I probably used a table that is too big for this, but
I've also just noticed like Power BI Desktop in the last year or so, there's times where it starts to get really slow and I just close it and reopen it with the same file and it's fast again. Like there's like a shelf life of how long it can be open, even if I don't have a bunch of RAM used. I don't know what's happening in the back end, but I've had some issues with performance.
I hope we didn't get something like that. But the idea is that now I can describe while we wait. The problem is that at a certain point I will not be able to create the relationship in an active way, because I create a circular dependency in the relationships, and Power BI doesn't allow me to do that.
Yep.
Solution is you can remove the bidirectional filter, but at this point we are in a big problem, because once you put the bidirectional filter, so you see the first relationship works, but let me create the second one, product key to product key. Here we go. Now we have the problem. We cannot create a relationship for a table that we imported in a model. We are in trouble now. And at this point, we have to find a solution. And possibly the solution could be, I can disable this. I can go here and I can say, okay, disable this, right? Single. And now, because this is single again, I connect the product key to product key, and this works again. Now, if I do this 5 minutes after I created the bidirectional filter, no problem, because I probably don't have any report in production. But can you do that once you publish the model in production? No, because you're going to break existing reports. Maybe written in Excel, with analyzing Excel, you're not even aware that there is someone who is consuming the model you created before. And if you change this, you're going to break existing models without any possibility to fix anything, unless you modify the report. Whereas if you use the other technique, you can always change the implementation of the measure that you use to filter a slicer. Yes, more work today, but not technical debt for your future model. So this is the real reason. If I look longer term, if I think that my model could be used for more than a couple of days, I prefer to spend 1 minute, maybe 30 seconds using the other approach. Yes, I have to create a measure, but come on, it's a small insurance you pay for your future. That's my point of view. Besides, before the performance and other discussion that we can have, I think this is the more important reason.
I completely agree, and like you hit it on the head. Their modeling changes have a much higher chance of causing breaking changes down the pipeline into Power BI. Thankfully, 6 months ago, sometime back in 2020, there was that wonderful feature where you publish. It shows what reports and entities that will be affected by your changes. But you've described it like the safest method for creating any kind of changes that might need to be met for requirements is doing it at the measure level, because that isolates it to the measure, and then nothing changes in any existing report unless the report layer gets modified to add those filters per visual or per slicer. So it's extra cost today, but it's the there's a phrase from back when I worked at Power Pivot Pro: "Be kind to your future self." Put the extra effort in today. And it will save you a ton of headache. It's like notes. Nobody likes to take notes. At least I personally don't. But it's very helpful to add a small amount of documentation to help yourself down the road.
Yes. No. Yes. I totally agree. And yeah, it's one of those small. I mean, sometimes it's a small feature, but it's important. And by the way, now that we have the direct query over analysis services, it's going to be worse in terms of dependencies that you can create. So, for example, another common thing I hear is that, with calculation groups, I no longer have implicit measures. Implicit measures are the ability to get any existing numeric column, bring it into the Power BI report and see the number with an aggregation, like the sum. Is similar to creating a measure on the fly. Problem of this feature is that in the short term, it doesn't allow you to use the same calculation in Excel, because Excel doesn't have the same feature. But in the longer term is that you create a strong dependency on a particular column of your model. Whereas if you create a dependency on a measure that you created today, you just have to keep the same measure name in the future, but you can change the internal implementation. So it's like you define a contract, an interface between your model and the report. And this layer can be changed in the future without breaking the reports that you create later. Now, I think the problem is I do almost every week, I create some report which is just a study, which is just something that I do to navigate the data and to get an idea. But the thing is, I don't publish them. The moment I publish a report on PowerBI.com, from my point of view, is something I want to share, I want to use, I no longer control. And this is the trigger that said, oh, wait a minute, if I do this, then I want to be safe, right? I don't want something that can be broken in a couple of days, or I don't want to remove the data, because the moment you publish the report, you also enable other people to create other reports on top of the same data set. And the data set becomes public, unless it is just in your personal workspace. But the moment you publish in a public workspace, this is what you're doing. And so this is, I think, that the trigger. I can explore my data for personal use. The moment I share it, it should be only visible through public and visible measures, not implicit measures. And so it's a best practice. The constraint you have for calculation groups that forces you to have measures, because calculation groups disable the implicit measures, is actually a good practice, is a best practice. So what's wrong with that? Nothing, in my opinion.
And I've had a few people tell me like, oh, it's like I don't use calculation groups. Why? Because it disables implicit measures. No. That's not an issue with the product as much as it's a learning. It's a painful learning curve. Yes, it's a feature, not a bug. So it's trying to encourage you. You really like for development, implicit measures are nice. And I will say, like the times that I want to quickly throw a table together and just drop some columns into Summit, there is an extra step to create a measure to to do
Yeah,
diagnostics, but it's a small cost for that.
I agree, and I would say more. From this point of view, that is this one, in some way, is a lesson that was learned in Power Pivot that was not applied to Power BI. In Power Pivot, I mean, basically, this is not a design problem. This is an implementation decision that we can disagree, because the implementation decision was to not create measures on the fly, which was the implementation made in Excel. In Excel, every time it was possible in Excel to bring a column, but what was happening, every time you did that, there was a measure automatically created for you. And the problem with this approach is that you were ending having many measures with an automatic name that was, polluting the list of names you had. That was the side effect of this approach. But to be honest, the alternative is not better when you look at the longer term. So it's clear that you do something to save one click today, but you always have to evaluate the cost for the future. And this is something sometimes we have conversation with Microsoft for discussing features and other things. And they ask feedback also to people like us that, meet several customers. And one of the objections is that, one of the goals that Microsoft has is we should make it easier to start using the product, okay? But making it easier to start using the product the first 5 minutes, 10 minutes shouldn't affect the ability to keep the model consistent in the future in this way. Because if you can obtain the same result, creating a measure on the fly, why you want to enforce people to not do that? You can hide this behavior in the engine if you want. You could create these measures hidden, they made hidden tables, they could have created hidden measures. But again, you would have measures that if you don't immediately delete from your model, you know that you potentially have a dependency on that measure. Today, if you rename a column, you have no warning about you're going to break existing reports. Because you rename a column, you rename the column reference within your PBX file. But any other report that you have in the same workspace is going to be broken the moment you publish it.
It would be nice if that could somehow propagate that through the system, like somehow push the change, column becomes this, and it would be lovely if that actually was able to get pushed through. Like it's, as an example, like back in the day in Excel, in Power Pivot, there used to be things where if you renamed a column in the model, all the measures that point to it would break. And at one point, they updated the tool to, if you did that, the measures would basically update as well with it. So like
No, I understand this, but I disagree, because this is this is a pure theory that you can live in a world where you are in a closed box and you control everything.
Sure.
The world is different. The world, think about SQL, right? How we had this problem in relational databases for many years, and the solution was simple. Don't expose data through tables, expose data through views.
Completely agree.
The view is the contract between the database and who want to consume the data. But this contract is centralized, is stored, and is part of the database. So we are in control. If you publish something, the moment I publish a dataset, and the dataset is public with tables that are visible, of course, you needed the authorization to act, but if you are part of the workspace, you can consume that dataset with your local Power BI file, which will be never tracked by any system.
Yep,
So
that's fair.
I had this conversation saying we could track the queries that are consumed by the server. And this theory is correct. If I consume all the queries received by the analysis services engine, I parse all the queries and I track the dependencies, I can figure out which columns have been referenced in the last 2 months in my database. And you can say, this column has been never used by anyone, I can remove it. Yes, unless someone created the same report using that column 3 months ago and you only analyzed 2 months. So unless you want to keep track of everything forever, and then what do you do if you had this consumption 3 months ago? Should we assume that it was no longer used? There are reports that are used once a year. So
Yeah,
what do we do? So this is the problem. I mean, the real world is complex. It's not easy. I understand people that want to find the solution. It's the classical problem. Oh, this product solved my problem. Sometimes the problem is not the problem that can be solved by the product, because the product is not aware of changing the bad or good habits that generate this confusion. And why we have this confusion? Because we want to be flexible, we are in a hurry, we have many reasons to do that. Good reasons, actually, because at the end of the day, this is a tool. The ultimate goal is not to have the perfect model, but to enable quick decisions with the right numbers. That's the ultimate goal. And because of this ultimate goal, I want my model to be available in 3 years. And if I only have the problem of, oh, I have to do something now, okay, but imagine this. Imagine a system where your report will disappear, will be deleted automatically in 5 days, okay? Unless you follow the best practices. This could be a good filter, right? You know that if you do something quick, the report will disappear in 5 days. Wow, I might need this in 1 month. Okay, so you cannot use this feature, this feature, and this feature, because these features have been, are available to have the, someone who is using Power BI for the first time, or someone who is really in a hurry for something that has to be closed today, and tomorrow everybody will forget. Because it's a report to make a decision now, but we will never use this report again. Then fine.
Just like it's a one-off throwaway, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so but we are digressing now.
I have a couple questions I want to throw to you that
Yes.
that have popped up since this. So the first one, which I think is a great one, is we've talked so far about like why bidirectional filtering can be bad. We've also talked about one scenario where it could be good, but I think as a general question, are there any other examples that you have where bidirectional is useful? I mean, the number one that I'll say just off the bat is row level security. Like you need very often bidirectional because you often have many roles per person. So at some point there will be a bidirectional turned on with maintaining referential integrity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me check if I have an example so I can show you. 1 second, I don't remember. I'm looking. So while I look for the example,
Sure.
the possible, just to give you the description, when you have two business entities that have a relationship that is not a one-to-many relationship. Okay, this is the main reason for that. Let me explain this with an example. Just looking at the example here, because this is something I don't have. I'm looking because this is a machine. The machine that I use here is not a machine that I use every day, and so I have to spend a bit to retrieve. But the classical example, okay, just to give you a description of this example. You have a bank account, and the bank account has one or more owners of the bank account, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the bank account is a classical example where the bank account and the customer are two different business entities. The transactions that happens in that bank account are registered, recorded with a many-to-one relationship with the bank account. But every owner of the bank account has access to the same account. So if I ask the question, how much money I have in my bank account, I don't have a share. I cannot share. I cannot, split my bank account, because imagine that there is a bank account owned by husband and wife, or two people that share an account together. They don't have. It's not like a company share. So you have 50%, 50%, 40%, 60%. Because if that was the case, it would be easier. You could say, oh, I know that I could split the transaction by customer, right? There is a transaction for the account, but 60% is Marco and 40% Alberto. This one, 30% Marco and 70% Alberto, and something like that. But with a bank account, it doesn't work this way, right? Which means that when I look at the individual, I have to sum all the accounts. But when I look at the family, where more people own the same accounts, at the family level, I have to compute each account only once, right? Now, this is a calculation that in SQL requires an additional effort, because if you think about, so let me see if I find this last relationship here, and many-to-many, this one. I'm getting the file, and in a moment you will see the file here in the screen.
There'll be a great
So
follow-up
if you think
question
about the
to many-to-many
calculation,
too.
yes, sorry?
I was just saying once you're done. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Now, I'm talking about a many-to-many relationship, but this is a relationship that when we look at the relationship from a relational model point of view, you realize that you need those business entities, you need those tables, because without the tables that I'm going to show you in a moment, you cannot actually create the model. So this is the model we have. So we have, it's interesting to see the model here. The model is the following. We have transactions. Each transaction has one account, and one account can have multiple transactions, so many to one, clear. Then there is a table here with the customers, but each customer can have multiple accounts. Each account can have multiple customers. In order to establish, in order to describe the relationship that exists between accounts and customers, we need a third table that has the list of the valid combinations between accounts and customers. And typically is a table that has account and one row for each customer, another account, one row for each customer, and so on. So from the point of view of the accounts is a one-to-many. From the point of view of the customer is another one-to-many. Now guess what? When I filter the customer, I want to filter the accounts, right? Because in this case, I want to see all the accounts of the customer. So this is one case where, assuming we have other conditions true, but in this case, let me show you what happens here. So here, for making it easier to understand the report, we have here in the list of the accounts not just numbers but a name. This is the name of the account, and as name of the account we use the name of the customers who owns the account, just to make it simple. But usually the model doesn't have a name, it has a number here. So the table account has this list of names, but internally it has a account key. This was just to make it easier to read this. And I have a table customer which has 4 customers' name. So now if I look at the table from the customer name, the customer name Duke, Mark, Paul, all of these customers seems having the same amount. Because what happens here? customers filters this table, accounts customer, which has only, we call this a table, a bridge table between two dimensions. But besides any technicality, you should realize that if I have a list of customers and I have a list of accounts, these two lists cannot tell me which are the accounts of a customer. So there is a third list, a third table that has this combination. And I want to use this combination, I want to use this list to say, if I filter a customer Luke, I want to filter all the accounts that are owned by Luke, and I want to see the sum of all the transactions. Now, in this case, because when I filter a customer, I filter only this, I could, and I can, enable the bidirectional filter. I still have to be careful about a couple of things, but in this simple model, I can do this. And once I did this, if I go back to my report, you see that now Luke has this amount, Mark has this amount. But first of all, be very careful, because you should realize that now the sum of the customers is no longer the total. Exactly. Every single time you enable the bidirectional filter in your model, you enable non-additive measures, which in this case is the right thing to do, but yep. Believe me, I have seen many cases where it was not intended to work this way. At that point, the problem is that the model is wrong. Yep. Maybe that you enable the bidirectional filter to obtain some other feature. As a side effect, now you have this. In this case, it's right, because this is exactly what we want to do. We want to see the same account multiple times. The same account here, for example, Mark has 3 accounts, but this account, Mark Paul, is shown here and is shown here too. So this 1000 is present twice, but in the grand total is counted only once. Like if I have a family, I will count every account only once. It's like a distinct sum. Now, I obtained this report without writing any single line of DAX, and believe me, if you do the same report in SQL, is more complex, and every time you change any little bit in the filters, you have to do many changes to your query in SQL. So if my goal is to have a semantic model that enables the user to navigate through the data, to change the filter, to invent new reports, it just works. Mm-hmm. But be careful, because this is still a bidirectional filter. It is still something that could be dangerous in certain conditions. So I would consider safe to enable the bidirectional filter in the model, like I did now, if and only if I can guarantee that never, ever, ever, ever in the future I will add other relationships between, let's say, accounts and other table that could be also related by the customers, because that would create another problem. Which means that as long as I create a relationship with accounts is not a problem, but the real issue is that I cannot create relationship to customers. If I know that I will never connect another table to customer and another table to accounts customer, I'm 100% sure that whatever I do with this relationship is safe. At this point, we can only discuss about the performance, because maybe that in a large model, I have other measures that should never be affected by the customer, and at that point, it could be smarter to say, well, the measures that I create in this table accounts should use this bidirectional filter, but any other measure in other tables, not necessary. And I don't want to pay the price for that in every single DAX measure. So let's say that in a very simple model where I always, or in a model where I always want to establish that if I filter customer, I want this behavior, fine. An example is, imagine you have customers and you have sports. You track the sports that the customer can play or would like to play. Every customer has many sport has many customer, exactly. But in that case, is an attribute of the customer right? So think about the data model. You will never, ever, ever create a relationship between the sports and something else. Because if you do, then you could be in trouble. And you should think twice before enabling this relationship at the model level. You can always enable this relationship at the measure level, we're using cross-filter, that doesn't propagate this behavior to every other measure and keep you free of adding whatever you want in the model, because every measure will decide exactly what to do. Again, it's a question of, do you want to be in control, or do you want to create something to make the job quicker today, but that create a limitation for the future? That's the question. So if you are safe and say, no, I will never, when I filter customers, I always want to filter accounts, I will never, this model will never grow too much, and if it does, I don't care, that's fine.
I have a really great thing about, so like right now you have 4 tables. Technically, if you
Yep.
wanted, you could have 3. And this is, I think, a important question is like, why not just use a many-to-many relationship? And I think it's a great example to maybe talk about
Guys, this is a good
weak
question.
relationship. Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I know this guy, because I don't want to offend anyone. Amedeo Magini. Okay, Amedeo, I know you. Amedeo, this is wrong. I can say because I know Amedeo. Because in this case, we have an information which is the relationship between the account and the customer. In order to create a many-to-many relationship, we should have a completely different pattern where we have a bridge table in a many-one-one-many chain of relationships. If you look at the chain of relationships here, is one, many, many, one. This table contains an information that is not written anywhere else. Of course, you could say, I could include the table customers with the account. Are you sure you want to create a table that doesn't have a primary key? It's dangerous for many reasons. It's not a good idea in Power BI. When you have, for example, when you have a table that doesn't have a primary key and you start creating relationships only using the many-to-many, you have to be careful every single time you use an iterator over the table, because not having a primary key, you might have problems with the context transition that could include duplicated rows. You have no guarantee that you don't have duplicated rows. Not having the primary key, you have the additional cost of having all the columns involved in the context transition. So you are involving a lot of performance issues. But from a data modeling point of view, the thing is there a relationship? Is there a business entity account? Yes. Is there a business entity customer? Yes. So we have 2 business entities. Okay, a customer is a business entity, the account is a business entity. Technically, these are 2 dimensions in Kimball model. When I do the example of the sports, that's a totally different example, because the sport is an attribute, is not an entity by itself in my model. My model doesn't have an entity sports, right? I mean, it could, but usually if I sell goods, it's just a store or sell something, it's just an attribute. I don't sell a sport, okay? It's just like the city name or the, I don't know, the gender or the weight, the color of the product is just an attribute. And when I have attributes, it's fine having a table that has the name of the attribute and the customer key. That's fine. And in that case, you can use the many-to-many cardinality relationship. Fine, no problems, right? But in this case, you will probably have other data other than the customer name. Do you really want to duplicate all this data? What happens when you want to look at the customer alone? So when you have 2 business entities in a many-to-many relationship, you have a structure that requires this table coming from the data source. This is not a table that I can invent, right? Because this table contains data, contains an information.
Sure.
When you have the other configuration, which is many, one, one, many, which is the case, customer and sports, right?
Yep.
No, sorry, customer and sport is not a good idea. The many, one, one, many relationship is usually a relationship that defines a relationship between 2 business entities may be a fact and a dimension with a different cardinality. For example, I have the budget, but the budget is defined at the month level, and my date table has date, and I need the date because I connect the sales that has the date. How can I connect the budget to the date? I connect to the month, but guess what? I have multiple rows in the date table with the month.
Yes.
So that is a relationship at a different level of granularity, which cannot use the primary key. But a many-to-many relationship in the classical sense, I mean, outside of the Power BI, outside of this word, Tabular and Power BI, many-to-many means this, okay? The relationship that has a many-to-many cardinality, okay, is something that has a name that unfortunately is close to a concept that for 50 years is well known in the business intelligence star schema naming convention, which is this. This is called a bridge table. The bridge table has information that connects two dimensions without having any measure. Okay, for this reason, is a fact table without any measure. It was also called factless fact table, but it's actually a bridge table. That is a bridge between two dimensions. If I remove this table, I have no way to connect accounts and customers. Period. Full stop. Now, there are cases where the many-to-many relationship can do the job, but it's a different job, and it's not a relationship between two business entities. It's a relationship between business. So it is a relationship between two business entities, but it doesn't include, as a relationship, it doesn't include additional information. That's the key in this difference. And I think we have an article and some video about this on SQL BI for these different type of relationships. Let me check if I find.
And I also know that like initially when that first came out with the option to have just a many-to-many cardinality with a single relationship, a lot of people thought like, oh, we could just immediately get rid of bridge tables and use this new like. Well, there's a lot of the model performs differently. It traverses or propagates the filters differently between the two. So like as you're all this everything that you're saying, like there's a lot of important considerations to have.
So we have a session here. We have a video recorded in a previous conference, but we also have this one, I think. We wrote too many things about this topic, so now I don't remember. Not this one. This one is another one. I'm sure we have an article. Maybe this one. Come on, I don't know what.
Relationships and I'm copying and pasting that into the chat window right now.
Yeah.
There we go.
This one, little relationship.
In general, for people listening, if you have a question in SQL, Google that, followed by SQL BI, and you'll probably find an article they've written on it.
Yeah, I didn't remember. Okay, so this is the article. This is the article. Relationships in Power BI and Tabular models. This article has a big recap of the different type of relationships, and it also includes some detail about what I was trying to explain now, which is explained here. So customer account with a customers in the middle is the real many-to-many relationship, whereas relationships at different granularities are those relationships that actually involve the many-to-many cardinality relationship, which is a completely different thing. They solve a completely different problem, which is propagating, for example, from product to budget. I want to propagate the relationship using the brand and not the product, because the budget is by brand and the budget is by country and the budget is by month, right? So something like that.
I think it's a great example.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those where it's
Amedeo.
Yeah.
Amedeo, don't be. Don't be. I mean, I wanted to. No, I mean, Amedeo is very, very good. I mean, he's one of the few people that I know that really, when they, when there is a question coming from Amedeo, is always okay. He knows something that he's not a, it's not a question that I can reply. Well, I will do something else. No, I have to be careful because it's always a good question. So we have to pay attention. It's sometimes also find some mistake in the article. So For this, if it was someone who I didn't know, I would not have made the joke. All right, so
Oh no,
I
it's
really
absolutely,
appreciate
and
it.
like it's some like you said, if you know the person, and sometimes it's good to like, hey, no, full stop. That's not the path you want to go. You want to go this path.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All
So
right.
I use the license. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's mentioning in the chat. He's very honored for your acknowledgement of his skill level. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, true, it's true. It's true.
I'd say give us about there maybe 5 or 10 minutes or so. I want to just pose
Okay.
the question to the chat. If anybody has any remaining questions, go ahead and just drop that in there, and I'll field those over to Marco. But yeah, Marco, just to kind of go with any of the other things we've been talking about today. Is there any kind of little final tidbits or things you'd want to share about some of what we've been covering?
Well, specifically about what we said today, no, not really.
Or anything else in general, like
I
just
think,
things that you've
I
found
think,
interesting.
yeah. I think that the hot. I mean, I tried to answer to a question I have seen in the last few weeks.
Okay.
Since we shown the direct query over analysis services and
Yes.
Power BI deserts, which Microsoft knows, say, is a name that is too long, and I say, guys, for me, it's the new composite model. You can call it whatever you want, but we need a two-word name. I mean, it doesn't make sense to use this long name, right? So the new composite models, which are the real composite models we want to use, is enabling a number of new approaches to creating reports. And I'm sure that there will be a lot of big mistakes made with this new feature because it is very powerful and could be used in a very wrong way, right? So as anything that is powerful, it could be also dangerous. But the people asking, oh, what are the best practices? Oh, we don't know. I mean, we heard about this feature for years. We discussed about this feature for years with Microsoft. We waited for this feature for years. But only now that we can play with it, we can try to figure out what we can really do. Because one thing is the whiteboard, one thing is the product. The product has limitations, has bugs that we hopefully will see fixed, but the product has to deal with the real world, and sometimes something that is in theory nice, it has to face the reality. Or sometimes you realize that even though we spent a lot of time thinking about this, we didn't fully thought about all the implications. And for example, you have two models, similar models, and you want to combine them together into the same, the same report. What do?
Sure.
You connect the relationship between the two models directly, you connect the dimensions together, you create a local dimension connected to the two external dimensions. And if you create a local dimension, do you connect the dimension that you have locally to the dimension that you have in the external model, or straight to the fact table? It's a big, it depends. But first of all, today we don't know. I mean, we can guess something. We know that the cost of the relationship between the models is related to the number of unique values you have in that relationship. So generally speaking, if I have 1 million products, I don't want to connect the product key, I want to connect the product brand, and I want to do an analysis at a higher level. If I create super models combining different models, I don't want to go to the maximum level of detail because that is not going to work for performance reasons.
Agreed.
Even though for a single product it will work. So again, it depends. But the problem is that how should we push on that? How many levels? Because in theory, if they put a level, I think they made a limitation to two or three models, right? Something like that. So you can
yeah.
create a model, it calls another model, it calls another model, but there is a limit. But the limit is totally artificial because there is no limit in theory. So if you want, you can go. But what should be the right thing to do? We don't know. Because there are problems that are related to the performance that are predictable, and there are problems related to the long-term evolution of the models. For example, how do we amplify the dependencies of a model once we start using this model in other models? How do we communicate which part of the model are safe to use in other models? Because today, when you connect to a model, you can see everything. You can see visible columns, hidden columns, everything. If I create the model, I potentially could say, look, this is safe to use in 5 years. Better you don't use this, right? Better don't use this. How can I communicate that? We can create convention, but for example, the convention of if it's hidden, you should not use it. Well, the problem is that once I input a model in a remote model, it's hidden again in my model, but I might have to use it because I have to create the measure. Where should we define a measure? I will define a measure in a remote model, but the problem is that certain measures have to be created combining the two, and this raises other questions about what is the more efficient way to do that, or what is the more correct way to get the right number also in 2 years, because what happens when that particular model will change. The problem is that if you look at the long term, it's a completely different perspective, because one problem is, I saw a problem today for the report that I will see tomorrow. One thing is, this report will run every day for 5 years. Wait a minute. Now it's a completely different perspective. How many reports in a company work this way? Of course, now that we have 0, right? Because it's not even released. But once it is released, once it is started to use, once you start using paginated reports on top of that, and a paginated report has a longer lifetime compared to a single report, we are going to create a lot of dependencies, and we are totally unprepared because we never did that. But I'm not saying this in a negative way. I mean, nobody knows. We have to learn.
Yeah.
So at the moment, I would say, be careful, right? Be careful means not don't use it, but start to use it in a safe way. Today, connecting to one model, importing one Excel table is fine, which is very easy. Okay, but 90% of the people just want to do that. So let's start to do that. Then we see step by step what can we do more complex. But
I almost kind of see
I'm excited, but yeah.
I almost see an irony in the, I feel like the previous generation of BI had an issue of siloing. Everything was separated and disconnected, and we had a lot of duplication across a company. 1,000 reports, 1,000 models. The complexity of this generation is almost going to be an issue of over-connectivity, of like so many parts all connected in a web with each other that it's almost flipped.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see like...
That's a very good point.
Yeah, so like it's a very interesting... it's like a pendulum that's swung in the opposite direction. Too much disconnection, now almost too many overconnection, which if it's architectured correctly, which we'll only really know as people start to test this out. But you'll have to have good implementation because it'll be very easy to, like you said, to make a change that can cascade to 1,000 other pieces that could break stuff. So things will become a lot more fragile as a lot more pieces are connected to each other.
Well, but I mean, I would not be so negative.
And I will. I'll say like.
No, this is a good point, because what you're saying is we have a more powerful technology.
Yes.
That
absolutely.
Increases the problem of governance, right?
100%.
True, but we will always have this kind of problem, and I don't think that the solution is having. So there are two things that I'm sure. I don't know what we will do in 5 years with the composite model. I don't know, but I'm sure about two things. First, there is. I mean, it's something we will always have as a problem, because The complexity level is going to increase. We have to manage it. Oversimplifying the problem is not a solution. I mean, we try, but we hide the complexity. We cannot remove the complexity. We can hide it, right?
Agreed.
We can make it simpler to manage. The second thing is the solution is not just another product. Every single time, I have seen a company, a vendor, someone saying, this product name is the solution to problem. It doesn't work because the product is a tool. The problem we're discussing is a problem of managing data, and a bigger issue is data quality, and another issue is interpreting the data. I mean, if the world was simple, if I had a single ERP, there would be no reason to create a data warehouse because everything should be simple. Because I have a single data source, everything normalized, it should just work. This is the theory. But the
In a perfect world, yeah.
No, but even in a perfect world, once you have the perfect normalized data model, the problem is when you ask a question, the question is ambiguous. And any AI system, imagine you create the artificial intelligence that really works for Q&A. Now I explain you how this will work. Show me the sales of the best customers in 2020. What do you mean by best customers? I mean, the customer who made more sales in quantity, in margin, or in sales amount. And you will continue this way for hours. The more tables you have, the more details you have to provide to give the right context to the question. When you ask to a person that works in a company, there is a context that immediately solves problems, which is exactly the context that you don't have when you have the diagram of the ERP system. And the solution we found so far with the semantic model is that we transfer part of this knowledge into the semantic model, into the relationships, into the measures, into the semantic model that has some context, so that when I ask the same question to Q&A or when I do drag and drop, I actually solved a number of ambiguities in my question because it was already there. Now, if I have to spend weeks creating the right semantic model, interviewing a lot of business people to ask them, how do I solve the ambiguity between these two relationships when you ask this question? So should I filter by this relationship or by that other? Because I can do both. And when you have a fully normalized model, you have thousands of ambiguities of this type. How can a automatic inference system know that? It doesn't know the company, it doesn't interview the people. I simply cannot understand how you can even just imagine this can work. In theory, yes, you can create a machine that continues to ask you questions. But I know what happens. After 5 minutes, you say, okay, it doesn't work. You call the DBA and say, I want this query. Fast. And problem solved. But again, sometimes we tend to oversimplify. The problem is we will lie. We will lie to have a product that solves everything. And every single time someone will say, oh, we have a product that solves this, we want to believe that, even though we know it's a lie.
But I think you provided like a great point where, like, both from the modeling perspective and even from now with all these features and more composite models coming out, context and an expertise is something that can't really be provided I honestly even can think really in my lifetime, like by an AI model. Like it can be trained, but it's still a very concrete training. It can't think abstractly and all this other stuff that really just comes from needing sometimes a solutions expert to be able to provide something that's easy to use and also to provide the architecture that does not become unnecessarily complex.
I, I also talk by experience. In my experience,
Yeah.
I do remote consulting or visit customers. In 1 hour, the time to write a DAX query, the DAX measure, could be 5 to 10 minutes. The last 10 minutes of the call. The first 50 minutes are questions. Because the initial question is, I want to do the measure that does this.
Yeah.
Okay, what if you have a filter here? And what if we have this condition? And what if this happens? But do you want this or that? Because I could do both. I mean, there are two different interpretations of your question. And we continue, we have 50 minutes of Q&A. And then I say, okay, now I have the requirement, I can write the measure. The more tables you include in the model, the more this question is difficult to answer because nobody actually thought about the problem. It's a very common experience for me to meet with people that didn't thought in advance about the problem. Once you explained the problem, they were not able to write the measure because actually they were in problem with the model, and the problem with the model existed because the model was not actually describing the reality they wanted to analyze. And this is something that requires, it's something that is not easy because today we collect data in a way that then we have to connect it. But when we collect the data, we lose the connection, the logic, the high-level connection. These are just numbers. Then we have to provide meaning to the number. And every single time I say to people, well, a semantic model is a value. Yes, you have to spend time, but then you have, it's time well invested because you create like sort of auto-documentation about your company that in a simple database you usually don't have. Actually, a star schema is the result of a transformation that already resolved a few of these questions. And the star schema is simple and usually doesn't have to require too many questions. But we know that when people, we cannot create a star schema, we have a more complex model. Indeed, we have more questions I have more questions to ask because the model is more complex. So we simply have to spend more time. But it's the nature of this analysis. I don't think it's gonna. Someone has a better solution to this problem so far.
Not yet. Exactly.
I didn't see anything.
And I think just a great paraphrase, and then I have a question as well from the chat. But I like the term storyteller. Like you have to take data and not just visualize it, but you have to tell the story, and you have to tell the right story that makes the most sense to the people you're delivering to. And that requires, as you said, experience, expertise, and context that, just it's time and effort. But just to transition, there's a really good question that I had myself when Switch came out, but I think we can use this last one as a question and then wrap up for the day.
So,
it's a common one that I get.
The question, the simple question is no. But the question is more complex because usually, a switch statement is internally translated into if statements.
Syntax sugar.
The problem is that the way you will write the same conditions using if is not necessarily the same code that you obtain with the switch statement. So it's hard to answer because you might, if you rewrite your if statement, maybe you write it in a different way and you could obtain better or worse performance depending on the conditions. In general, it's not important if you use if or switch, it's important how you write them and how you apply. For example, we have a few articles about this topic. If you look for SQL BI if switch optimization, you will find at least 1 or 2 articles that describe a few optimization, but probably there are more.
Use variables.
Use variables is one, but for example, using variables, it could be a problem. So sometimes it is a good idea, sometimes it is a bad idea. I store something in a variable before the if I think that the same value could be executed twice. But if a measure will be visible only in one of the branches of the switch or the if statement, it is better to include the measure and not the variable into that branch. But again, because we are talking about optimization, the optimization doesn't exist isolated from a problem, because the very same technique makes a report faster and another report slower. I can every single time I teach optimization techniques, usually I show one technique that improves the performance in this report and actually creates a slower report in this other case. Because I want to transfer the message that you don't, if it was so easy, if it was so easy, oh, if is faster than switch, or the opposite, why Microsoft created the other one, right? Because
True.
why? I mean, if switch, imagine my answer is, oh, switch is faster. Oh, so all my if statement can be translated into switch. Doesn't make any sense, right? So the question is not the function you use, but the way you structure the code and the way the parser interprets it. My suggestion is follow the best practices first, and the best practice is not use one or the other. Write a code that is readable first, write or get the right numbers, follow the obvious best practices, especially about calculate and the filter context and the context transition, and then when you have particular requirements, you can use some technique, but only if you need it. Need it means, is the measure good enough? Is the measure fast? Are you happy for the report? Fine. Think about getting the right number, not about dealing with these things. Then I like to deal with these things, but I know that it's a waste of time if you don't have the right numbers. If I optimize a measure and I get wrong numbers, I broke a measure. I didn't optimize anything.
I want to paraphrase that last thing that you just said right there as like the nugget of wisdom from that is the number one most important thing with building reports, models, or measures is it giving the right numbers first? Performance, optimization, readability, functionality, all of that second.
Yes.
All the numbers need to be first. And I've seen so many people get caught up on having to make it perfect. No, just get the right number and then figure out how to tune it. Like tune it that's the phase 2 of learning a tool set. Phase 1 is just making sure that it's reporting the right information. So yeah, I completely agree on that.
A few months ago, now this is something we have, in our backlog at the moment, but a few months ago we discussed that because many people know some notion about programming. Now, the way almost any development project works today, you write code, at the same time you write unit tests for the code. So you write another program to test whether the program that you're writing works. It's the only way to create large systems these days because it reduces the probability, it doesn't remove, but it reduces the probability you introduce bug and regression when you apply changes to your code in the future, okay? Now, if you translate this best practice into our world, into the business intelligence, we don't have any tool to help people who wants to create this paradigm in BI with Power BI or also with analysis services. What does it mean? If I create a measure, I don't test my measure. And the test for the measure will be good because if I change this measure or another measure I could depend on in 1 week, am I going to break something or not? So creating unit tests for the semantic model is a good idea. And I know a few teams that do that. I mean, I met a few people working with analysis services usually. They do that. But it's really, 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 the 0.0 something % of the developers today, the measure works, done.
Agreed.
Maybe you have a report you use to test your measure, but you don't have a system that automatically validates the measures before publishing the report, right? And And it is actually possible to do that, but there are a few things to do. So first of all, we need a data set for the test. If I always work in production, the number change in production, how do I know what is the right result I have to expect?
Yep.
Then you have to deal with sample queries and results expected. The moment you run this test every day, for example, or every time you publish something, every time you go in development, when you see that something is different, you have a warning, and you know, oh, I made this, I changed this margin calculation, and now the report I wrote 6 months ago is producing a different number. Oh, I forgot to filter this. You know, because when you introduce a new table or a new relationship in the model, do you really want to wait for some user to discover that a number is wrong?
Oh God, no.
You know, it depends, right? But possibly no. So these are the problems.
Yeah. I was just saying it takes a lifetime to build trust and a second to lose it as a developer or consultant. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And so the Power BI has been created as a way to create, you know, to get the self-service BI, and nobody cares about data quality when you do self-service something, right? So it's something for yourself. But now I see many cases where Power BI is actually used as an enterprise solution. You create maybe you start with Power BI, then you promote to analysis services or to Power BI Premium, then you have Tabulator or Visual Studio, you manage a larger project. At that point, this could be critical data used by hundreds of thousands of people in the company to make, you know, operative decisions. There is a need for data quality, but also in smaller teams. Why? I mean, even just 10, 20 people could be a number that is large enough to create, you know, damages for the company if you have the wrong number. So you have to evaluate what is the possible cost of wrong numbers that are produced because of, you know, something that you introduce. I remember when I worked in projects, you know, years ago before Power BI, large corporate project, this was an important part. We came up with an, you know, internal system to run these queries over the night, and sometimes we received the, you know, if something was wrong, we received emails. Sometimes the problem was in the ETL, because the same problem now, you know, in a large system you have a separate ETL system, but now you have Power Query. What if the transformation you wrote in Power Query fails because you received data that was not expected? And maybe that you affect something that is only in the past, so you don't see this immediately, or people don't realize that the number is wrong. Because the other problem is that how can you realize the number is wrong? That's another problem. So I think that this is an area where there is not even a minimal effort of doing something today.
No, I agree, and I mean, at least in the U.S., there's the phrase kind of like measure twice, cut once when it comes to like carpentry, and I kind of like the idea similar with modeling is you should validate twice, publish once. You know, it's very easy to kind of miss the mark, and like I was saying earlier, it's very easy to quickly lose trust. And like the moment you publish information that was something that you missed, not, you know, because there's plenty of times where data is just given that's bad data from the client and they tell you it's good. That's kind of more on them if they say it's validated. But it's easy to skip that step. You know, very easy to skip taking notes. But you really want to be just to all the people tuning in, just you know, 100% make sure you're validating all of that. I do know, Marco, we're an hour and a half in. I love talking shop with you. Exactly. No, and this is great. You know, but I do want to just be cognizant of people's time and wrap this up. Also, will at some point, you know, as well in the future, love to have you back on. I know it's always great to talk to you, and there's tons of stuff with DAX to talk about. Chewy had a great comment that I wanted to just to throw up onto there we go under the screen. Have a little I can applaud for him. So here you go.
Thank you.
There's a little applause for you.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys.
Yeah,
it was a pleasure.
But yeah, Marco, thanks for tuning in. Everybody, thanks for joining. We had after about 20 minutes in, we've basically been hovering above about 110, 120 concurrent viewers right now in this. So You always have a large fan base that follows you, which is fantastic. So
Thank you very much.
yeah,
Okay,
everybody.
guys. So I will enjoy my weekend now. Maybe I will write some code this way. You know, during the weekend because we are still, you know, not in lockdown, but close to, and so nowhere to go. So you can watch sports on TV. You can watch Netflix,
Yeah.
but we finished Netflix a few months ago, and now I just to start to type some code. No, we have some interesting project coming in, but you will see soon some news.
Oh yeah, so yeah, make sure to check out and
Yeah.
subscribe to their blog if you haven't already. There's always great content from SQL BI. So, all right,
Okay.
everybody. Ciao.
Thank you very much. Have a nice weekend. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, and we're good.